From the case books of God's Gumshoe, Case 607, Part 2B. Codename, Taylor. As we saw in Part 1 of this series, these are very complex and complicated problems, going back to the very beginning of our evolutionary history and our prehistory, to the prehistoric times. Here we saw that the evolution of consciousness depends on the environment or the culture that it's in. And the evolution of culture, and hence civilization, depends on the consciousness that makes up that culture. It's like two hands climbing a rope. Both are necessary in order to progress further up the rope. But we also need to know that we're climbing the right rope. And today, what we see is this fight over whose rope is the right one. But when we stand back, we see that the evolutionary impulse always proceeds along a path, a progressive path of evolutionary ascent and of a gradual evolvement and progressive development of the physical, intellectual, and spiritual natures and capacities of the manifold creatures who inhabit the very cultures comprising such an evolving planet. And it is this impulse working through consciousness that creates culture and thus moves us forward in the evolutionary drive up the spiral to create a better world for ourselves, our families, our communities, and our planet. But, as Albert Einstein said, problems cannot be solved by the same thinking that created them. That the consciousness that created the problem is not sufficient to solve the problem. That in order to solve the problem, we must rise to another level, a higher level of thinking. Because every problem of our world is a problem in consciousness. And so, Taylor, the solutions to these problems, as well as to all of the other challenges which we face, both individually and collectively, involves the raising of consciousness, the uplifting of our human thinking. But more than just our thinking. Let me demonstrate what I mean. Here's a short parable from the Urantia book. Imagine that you are transported back into time, back to the time of the old Stone Age. As you awaken to your surroundings, you hear a stirring right in front of you. There, standing right in front of you, so close that you can smell him, is one of our primitive ancestors of cave-dwelling times. A short, misshapen, filthy, snarling hulk of a man, standing legs spread, club upraised, breathing hate and animosity as he looks fiercely in your direction. Now, such a picture hardly depicts the divine dignity or the nobility of the human species, does it? But now, allow us to enlarge this picture. In front of this animated human crouches a saber-toothed tiger, also snarling, hissing, and spitting hatred and animosity. And behind the man, a woman and two children who cower in fear. Immediately you recognize that such a picture stands for the beginnings of much that is fine and noble in the human race. But what changed? The man is exactly the same in both pictures. Only in the second sketch are you favored with a widened horizon. From this higher perspective, you immediately discern the motivation of this evolving human. His attitude becomes praiseworthy because you understand him. You understand him and why he is doing what he is doing. Well, it's the same with everyone we know. When we come to understand the motives behind the actions of our associates, how much better we come to understand them. The more we get to know them and understand others, the more we come to understand their worldview, or how they see the world. And this determines why they do the things that they do, the intentions and motivations behind their actions. And this is very important in understanding the problem that is in front of us today. Because it all starts with our worldview. Our worldview determines our beliefs, our values, our desires, and our intentions. To have those desires and needs met, which in turn determines our actions and our behaviors, which in turn creates the results in our lives, both positive, which we all want, and what we also might view as negative results. Now we'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. In a healthy individual and in a healthy society, worldviews are not final and static, but they evolve in responses to changes in our environment and as we grow. Can you remember your worldview at, say, age 12? Did it change by the time you were 16? 21? 35? 45? Older? In this sense, worldviews are closer to being hypotheses, assumptions about how the world works, that we validate through our experiences, and being able to continually test and update our worldview is an indispensable evolutionary skill. An incomplete or out-of-date worldview is like having an incomplete or out-of-date map. It's very difficult, if not impossible, to get where you want to go. And most likely you end up someplace that you do not wish to be.
We are born with an identity, a sense of me-ness. And over time, propelled by biology and culture, our sense of me-ness expands, encompassing such things as family, tribe, city, religion, country. But then, for many of us, our expanding sense of me-ness slows way down. We get more rigid. Our boundaries become more firm. Those left outside our boundary become the other, me and them. Competitors, threats, even enemies. But what science now tells us, and wisdom traditions have long taught, is that everything is interconnected. Nothing is truly separate. Who we are includes everything that exists, which means that to pose an enemy, to fight an enemy, is to fight ourselves, and with increasingly disastrous consequences. We live in a time when we're being both pushed and pulled to continually expand our sense of self, of who we are, to take in new information, new ideas, new perspectives, changing our very understanding of who we are. Sometimes this can feel very threatening, and there may be aspects of us we do not like. We may get angry, defensive, fearful, but these are just signs that our boundaries are quite rigid and need to, loosen up a bit. Because we know from evolution that it is by taking in what is that we're able to transform what is into something new and much, much better. Well, that is the process and the promise of evolution.
How do we know when our worldview needs updating? One indication is when we encounter mounting problems that seem unsolvable. Often this leads to stress, anxiety, mood swings, perhaps even depression, despair, and desperation. But these are all signs that growth is, or will be if you allow it, that growth is taking place. Another more personal indication that your worldview is incomplete and needs updating is when we encounter a worldview that we find threatening. As we grow and mature, the process evolves us. We come to see that our worldview box exists inside a larger context of reality. Only now, rather than just our own worldview, which of course is the only right way to see the reality of our world, we see that there are multiple worldviews. In fact, there is one worldview for each person on this planet, and that makes over 6 billion worldviews in total, all walking around on this planet. What is essential to understand is that all of these worldviews are valid, in that they exist within the larger context of reality, our world, which is the logical outcome of a person's experience of the world. Because we all have different experiences, we all, of course, will have different worldviews that frequently do not agree or match up and see things the same way. You probably know someone who is very different than you and a different way of looking at the world than you. Oftentimes we appreciate that diversity because we grow, but other times we're threatened by it and often simply reject it as just wrong or stupid or something. When we encounter a worldview that we find threatening, we have two choices. We can reject it, and thereby lose an opportunity to expand our own worldview and learn something. Or we can engage with it and seek to understand the experiences that produce that view, and thereby expanding our worldview and consequently our circle of compassion, our circle of understanding. Now, we all know that it is sometimes difficult to understand another person's worldview because we typically identify with our worldview. When it is threatened, we feel threatened. Challenge my worldview and you challenge my very self and my very sense of self. The shift in thinking that is required is to understand that while each of us have a worldview, we are not our worldview. If we were, we would all still be 12 years old. Rather, we are defined by an apparent unique capacity to consciously adapt and expand our worldview as we experience and evidence shows up, begin to modify and change, and then grow and change within ourselves. In other words, what makes us most human is not our certainty, but our conscious adaptability. Our ability to see another worldview and allow it to grow and transform us into a new human being that is growing and transforming this world. Because transformation means a change in the way one sees the world and a shift in how one sees oneself. It's not a change of point of view, but rather a whole different perspective of what is possible. It's the capacity to expand your worldview so that you can appreciate different perspectives, that you can hold multiple perspectives simultaneously. And that is huge. It's not just moving from one point of view to another, but really expanding your awareness to encompass more possibilities. And so, to those mortals who would expand their consciousness and progress their culture, their mortal career of universe service is wide open. What dignity of destiny and glory of attainment await every one of us? Can you fully appreciate what has been done for us? Can you comprehend the grandeur of the heights of eternal achievement which are spread out before us? As we stand on the shoulders of great men and women in this great spiral destiny, even while we trudge the lowly path of life through our so-called veil of tears, we begin to see that all the way up the spiral that we transcend what is, but include all of those values that are very important. Ken Wilber calls it to transcend and include. With that, we invite you to join us for Part 2C as we transcend and conclude this series. Join us. Thank you.